I never thought like we would come off rip and be like, this is Mark DeBonis, this is Dominic Missana. Before like, any of this is done, I love it for it to sound as natural as possible. So the last thing I want to do is like be thinking of things, especially about myself. So when I think about interviewing someone else or like having someone else be the focus, like even that, I'm like, okay, how can we make that natural? So this type of thing is even scarier to a certain degree.
Well, it is, and it's like, we've been hanging out a lot, talking a lot, and we're new acquaintances, or like, is acquaintance?
I'm gonna go to friends right now.
Well, I guess acquaintance is not a friend. Yeah, no, we're above acquaintance. I don't know what the term is. We're new whatever. We're new friends. But we've been hanging out enough where we kind of know each other. We've been talking with each other, and we want the possible viewers, the audience, the listeners to kind of also be in on that loop on who we talked about who I am. Now we're talking about who you are.
I like that.
And that's what this is all about. We're not looking to do this past this episode as much for either of us.
Thank
God. But let's figure out, like, first of all, who are you? Like, let's just start straight from the top.
Oh man, who am I? Man, I'm a musician. As far as what I do for a living, I make music. Ever since I could remember, I think I was fortunate enough to know at an early age this was something that called to me. And I say this all the time with people, like-minded people, or people that are in the creative space. Really, I feel like the one true benefit in our world, if there is any, which there are, but one of them that stands out the most to me is knowing what you want or knowing what you love as early on as possible. And people don't understand, I think, how much of a gift that is, how that may be the gift. Just knowing or having some influence in some direction. And from a very young age, I just knew that music called to me. I heard my first record. It was an actual record from my dad's record player. And as cliche as it sounds, it was the Miles Davis record, Kind of Blue. I'll never forget that day. We had a front room of this house we were renting in Fredonia, New York, which is hilarious, where we put a piano and the record player in. And my dad, I feel like somewhere in his head, he was like, let's just put this kid in this room and hope it works out or something.
Close.
Yeah. And that was the first record. It's Kind of Blue by Miles Davis. And my dad kind of pushed the listening part of that for me. So, yeah, I'm a musician. I'm a producer. And I've been playing music professionally since I was 13 years old. It was the first paid gig I had. Yeah.
There's probably not a lot of people in this world who know who they are or what they want to do, especially at that young of an age. And, like, having parents that were, pushing you to that thing, like if your dad did push you to get into music, or, whoever, like, do you think if it wasn't for that, you would have fallen into it? Or,
it's funny. I was extremely grateful. I'm extremely grateful now, but I was extremely fortunate, I should say, because growing up, my dad's family, they were all extremely sports oriented. My grandfather was a coach. Yeah. He was a principal of a high school for some time. Then he coached football at UB for some time. And my family's, they're pretty old school, but has that very old school mentality of like, we get up, go to work, we get the bills paid, and we get it done.
Yeah, right? Yeah.
And a lot of that comes through the males in my family. We're all very hard workers, but doing things that men sometimes do, in quotation marks. Cement, car work, coaching sports, and being highly involved with sports. So for me, from a young age, I was very lucky because my dad always made music seem cool. It was never dorky or corny. There was a coolness to it, and at a young age, in some weird way, a sexiness to it.
Yeah.
Where I was constantly like looking at record covers, constantly like trying to find out who did what on what record from a young age. The first people in my family to have a computer were my grandparents. It was like big family news. Grandma and Grandpa got a computer I think it was to just make like taxes easier or some shit, just some like ridiculous like business stuff that I didn't think it was really even needed.
Yeah.
But it was an old compact Presario,
Yeah.
and it came with Encarta Encyclopedia on it. And I remember it couldn't be more than 7 or 8 years old, sneaking away from all the family function to load up Encarta Encyclopedia. And I didn't even know how to search for like what I liked, but I knew I liked music. My first searches were music, like in Encarta. And I liked, I slowly found, like, my dad had me turned on to blues and jazz from an early age. A lot of predominantly Black American music is kind of what molded my interest at all. I got into blues at a young age. I started playing harmonica based off, no joke, an Encarta Encyclopedia search for the word harmonica.
Wow.
I just heard of it.
And you were just like, this is what I need to do.
Got to find out what it is, where it's from, and the first recording I've ever heard was on Encarta Encyclopedia off a compact Presario computer of Sonny Terry and Brownie McGee. It's one of the earliest recordings. It's called "Whoopin' the Blues," where he literally plays a harmonica solo while he's also putting sounds in with his mouth.
Okay.
It's hard to emulate, and maybe I'll do it with a real harmonica someday. But
yeah.
It captivated me. I every single time I went to my grandma's house, I would sit in this back den and just search harmonica, Sonny Terry, Brownie McGee, blues. I was enthralled with that time period after this quick search. After that, man, it was kind of like just a spiral of like, who sounds like this? What is this? More refined versions. I got into R&B, slowly into versions of jazz. But really, man, I was very, very fortunate from a young age to have someone I looked up to think that something was cool and then tell me it was cool. No, this is cool. Jazz is cool.
Yeah.
You know, and I quickly started having that mentality through like learning middle school and high school. I would constantly bring my music taste into the hang, right? And it was shit on so fast. All my friends loved emo music, punk rock. My earliest memories are my friends being in love with Blink-182. And I'm like, well, have you heard this Les McCann, Eddie Harris record? It's try to make it real compared to what? Blink, blink, blink. And they're like, what the fuck is this shit?
Yeah.
Like they have no clue what I'm listening to. And I'm like thinking that the stuff they're listening to is just a waste of time and loud. And
yeah, I imagine that's like introducing like mustard to a bunch of teenagers or something, you know, because everyone's like, their taste is just, you got to be born with it, because it's really like one of those things where if it's not around you at your whole life, like there's no way a high school kid is gonna listening to the blues
it's
for
so
no
true.
reason.
Like, yeah, if there's no prior influence, it's tough to get into. I have this memory. My friends wanted to start like a band. They've had bands. I was born on the west side of Buffalo. My mom got her master's degree at Fredonia State, so we moved to Fredonia for quite some years. And my father was still working at Hutch's, so we'd commute from Fredonia to Buffalo. And then we moved back to Buffalo when my grandparents were getting a little bit older. So I had a bunch of different friend groups from a bunch of different time periods. But the high school, 8th grade into high school is when I finally started to get made fun of for like what I liked musically.
Yeah.
And I was meeting new kids. You know, I wanted to be in a band or at least play with kids, jam with kids or whatever.
Well,
this is how it goes, man.
this is it. Yeah, keep
I
going.
kind of like the vibe,
I know.
with the main light. And
you gotta just commit to it.
yeah, exactly. I was meeting kids. I wanted to jam or at the least have kids come over to my house and see like, you know, all these instruments that I've like tried to accumulate over the years.
Yeah, you're like,
know?
hey, like look at all this.
Yeah, exactly. So I had a couple friends over one night, And their moms, they show up with their mom, like their mom drops them off, right? But they have vans, and they have like 3-foot Marshall half stack like guitar rigs. Shit that what the hell are we gonna play? I don't play music that requires that.
Like electronics.
Not even electronics, just big amps.
Yeah.
Like huge guitar amps. Marshall half stack. There was a Mesa Boogie, shout out Rohan. This Mesa Boogie, I would say 4x10. I don't even know how many speakers. It was huge, right?
Yeah.
So you could imagine my parents are just like, oh shit, what is this? I thought he liked jazz. What the fuck are they about to embark on down here? Short 90 minutes later, the whole house smells like weed, and no one can hear anything. But I remember my earliest memories were trying to play like what I liked for these kids. And I would like sit on the drum set and be like, I kind of like this type of thing. It'd be like some blues or like funk groove. And like, it sounds like old or something, man. Like that's this is kind of what we do. And they put on a record or start playing it.
Yeah.
And just to fit in, I knew I hated all the music they were listening to.
None of it. Knew how to play it.
Yeah, none of it resonated with me, like spiritually or whatever, like on that realm. But I was like, I need friends and I need to survive out here.
Yeah.
I'm gonna play all these records down. I'm gonna learn them all on whatever instrument they want me to play in, and then my house will be the house that these kids want to come to and hang out and smoke pot at.
Yeah, well,
it sounds so corny, but it's really, really how it kind of like started in that realm.
Well, like, as a comedian, you can tell when you're funny because the audience laughs or they don't laugh, but you kind of don't know that until you get started. But as a musician, like, you have musicians in your family?
This is the funniest part about, I get asked this question a lot, and this is kind of the funniest part about my story. I have one person in my family who plays instruments.
Yeah.
His actual name, and we could bleep it out if we have to, but for the sake of...
Is his name Guitar?
No.
No,
no, his real name is Frank Vigilante.
That's hilarious.
And he's my father's first cousin. He used to bully my dad a lot when they were kids, but you know how those relationships end up working out somehow down the line if you keep the fun in there somehow, But from a young age, my dad's always liked music, so his barometer was my cousin Frank at the time. He was in a lot of Buffalo bands. He actually played with George Paleo, who we know from the Damone Jackson Outcome. They were in a couple weird Buffalo startup bands together that never ended up working out. George.
What a small circle.
It's wild how it works out here. But from a young age, he was like my crazy relative that would come from New York City and visit on a holiday, bring a trumpet, bring 24 bagels from the Lower East Side. It was like the most eccentric, cool outlet I had at that time. Like, oh, cousin Frankie V is coming in from New York. I know we're gonna play music. I know we're gonna like get the family camcorder out, do some funny videos. That was my earliest influence of music. And he used to play a little harmonica. He still plays harmonica. And I was enthralled by harmonica. I don't know why, from such a young age, something with blues or whatever.
Yeah.
And I used to call him to try to get harmonica lessons on the phone from Buffalo to New York when I was a kid. I have some early memories of me like not understanding what the hell he's talking about, because it's a very physically demanding instrument as far as your mouth and your throat and your teeth go.
Yeah.
But so learning over the phone is tough. But he used to be patient with me and bring some instruments when he'd come to visit, and that was the only person in my family who I looked at like someday I could play in a band like Frankie V, and my dad always was like cultivating that in a cool way.
Did he gauge if you were good or not? Because there's like, I was gonna say, because that's why I was asking, because it was like, how, you must have really loved it at an early age, because music never sounds good when a kid's playing it. Maybe you're like some prodigy drummer on YouTube or something, but like for the most part, it's just gonna sound like noise. And the fact that your parents didn't tell you to just shut up and go outside is pretty crazy.
Okay, yeah, there's a couple parter in this, but knowing what's good and just being excited as early on, right? I think the first step is like, what could we get my kid or this kid excited about?
Yeah.
What is making this kid's eyes light up? And for me, anytime my dad introduced me to some music, or another influence. We had a barber. His name is Lou the Barber. Shout out Lou Saviano. He's got his spot on Delaware to this day. He's cutting hair. Joe and Lou Saviano. They had a piano, an upright piano in the barbershop. And when I was a kid, Lou Saviano would play jazz standards on this upright while I was getting my hair cut, or while I was, just hanging out in the shop, he'd play. And then one day he was getting rid of the piano while we were in the shop. He's like, Rock, to my dad, I'm looking for someone, who do you know who may want this piano? And my dad's like, I want it. Louis, we would love this piano. I would love Dominic to learn. And since I was a kid, it was always like Louis' piano was a thing. So we bought the piano from the barber. We had it moved into my house. We lived on Lafayette Avenue on the west side. And from a young age, I was constantly just enthralled by noise. We would take all the pots and pans out in the kitchen. That was the earliest form of it, and bang pots and pans. So just the influence of being inspired by older people in my life. Yeah, make noise. Play. Yeah, this isn't wrong. Express yourself through this medium, whatever it was. I think they were just excited that their child or their family member was excited.
Yeah.
Which, this is so hokey, but it goes to the end of life that way. It's love, man. Someone who loves you wants you to see that you're happy about something,
For
and then
sure,
hopefully we can cultivate what that is. I was loved as a child, and this part of my life was nurtured from a young age, and I could not be more grateful about that. That's I could not be more grateful for that. The best of the best have a hard time describing what good is, because it's just a beautiful thing to be able to express yourself and not be condemned for it. The barometer for good is school, right? You get into college playing a certain instrument, they see something in you and they want to make you better. So there's opportunity there.
Well, with the good, though, you got to, because you evolved out of Buffalo, obviously. I'm assuming at not a teenager, but did you moved eventually to New York, right? You never lived anywhere else. It was Buffalo and then New York.
Yes, exactly.
So you went from Buffalo to New York because you realized that you were good at it, and then you were now I just need to be where it is. And you must have evolved a lot there.
Yes. Okay. So realizing you're good, that's the other step to it that is hard to put into words too. I think that comes from, if you love something enough, you just do it a lot.
Yeah.
Right? As simple as it goes, practice makes perfect. And when you're doing something all the time.
The cliche things are always the best.
That's why
we
they're
hate
cliches.
them because they're cliche, but they're there for a reason.
I was just going to say, they're literally there for a reason.
Time, just perform whatever.
Yep. And I was playing some type of instrument all the time, skipping some type of class to go to this band wing of my high school and play piano, play saxophone, write stuff on piano. I was writing corny tunes since before I could remember. But really, man, I forget.
But being in New York, that.
Oh,
that
sorry.
was.
Yeah. What happened was this. We're kind of jumping around a little bit, but my high school, I was fortunate enough to be in a high school that really celebrated the arts. And there's a competition in New York City run by Wynton Marsalis and the Jazz at Lincoln Center Orchestra. It's called the Essentially Ellington Competition. I've never really been about mixing competition with music just because I love it so much. I would never want anything to really ruin it. But my high school saw this as a big opportunity to kind of get out there in any type of way, and in turn show kids kind of what real life is like for musicians who play in the world and make a living doing it. We ended up entering this competition. Every high school in the nation in Canada can sign up for it. They get a lot of applicants every year. That's one of these bigger competitions that are known throughout the child music world. We ended up coming top 15. And we got to travel to New York City as a whole school band and play the music of Duke Ellington in front of the Jazz at Lincoln Center Orchestra and anyone who wants to come, whoever, they sell tickets to that show, and then they adjudicate you.
So it's kind of like Sister Act.
what's the I love Sister Act.
That was like the thing.
Oh,
right?
happy day.
Yeah.
Oh, happy day. That was my happy day for
Yeah.
sure. You know, there are different nuances of the competition, but throughout the show, each band, there's a certain amount of soloists selected for each song that you play by Duke Ellington. I was playing baritone saxophone for this show, and I happened to take a solo on a tune written by Duke called Sea Jam Blues. The board, the committee, and the other schools happened to take a liking to the solo. I got a great response from it. And at the end of the entire competition, it's a 3-day-long competition, they announced the winners of the school, but then they also announced separate solo award winners.
Okay, like MVP type thing.
You got it. And your boy copped one for baritone saxophone at a young age. This was a huge deal for me as far as
awesome, yeah.
what the future meant. It was kind of the biggest resume builder I had at that time. Any college that saw, you know, essentially Ellington, whatever on there, that was a good look for the performance-based schools. So yeah, I quickly kind of, I knew from that experience that New York was the quickest route to the best. Like, where are the best musicians at? I need to hang out with those people.
And how long after that did you end up in New York?
Oh, as soon as I graduated high school, I got into Purchase Conservatory, and I pretty much stayed there as long as I could. I would come home for a couple months at a time for some summers to get some work done.
Yeah.
Gig a little bit. I'd actually bring musicians home from New York to live with me because I would convince them because the rent was so cheap in Buffalo. So I was like, yo, we can go to Buffalo, bust ass for a summer, save a bunch of money, and go back to college, you know, with fat pockets. Some of the best musicians I've ever played with. David Frazier Jr. is one of the best drummers I know. He would come back to Buffalo. He's got some roots here. And play through the summers. We get our chops up and kind of we had a band.
That's pretty cool, though.
Yeah, it was fun. We had a band at the time. It was called Higher Vibe. Shout out to Higher Vibe and the team there. We had a cool Buffalo run, playing some gigs out here. I also had another drummer, Patrick Morrison. He came and stayed with me. These are like some of the most talented dudes I've met at their instrument. And for some reason, they saw something in me, and they would follow me around, and we'd have some really cool, kind of long-standing, long-running gigs for a while. I loved that whole transition. Was scary and beautiful.
That's always the best when you don't know anything and you're kind of just following your gut.
Yeah.
And just going with the flow. And like, you know, you've told me that you were playing at the Knitting Factory, and like, so was that how long into being in New York did like those type of gigs start happening?
Yeah. Now we're jumping around.
Oh, we're
quite
jumping.
some time.
Yeah. Because I imagine there's a lot that happened, but like, you know, you must have been, where were you at your career at that point when you started doing like the Knitting Factory?
Okay, so the music stuff out there, it definitely takes time, and it's all investments of time, right?
Yeah.
And relationships, obviously. But when I first got out there, I had graduated from Purchase with a jazz performance degree on saxophone, and it was really, really hard to find a legitimate sax gig. All the ones that I wanted.
Yeah, I imagine.
These big pipe dream gigs, but I was like, how could I play on SNL? How could I play on a late night show? And a lot of these dudes have had those gigs for over 10, 20 years, and they gotta know you and then pass away or something.
Yeah,
It's just how the business works. So it was really hard for a while. There's a period of time, about 3 to 5 years, where I was getting a lot of private, like, wedding gigs. I landed this insane job that I don't love talking a lot about because it's crazy, but there is a company in New York called Experience the Ride, and essentially what it is a tour bus.
Okay.
With the side of it is a window, and it stops at various landmarks throughout the city, predominantly Times Square, and the bus will stop and they'll say like a fun fact or a historic thing about where they stop. My job was fake busker on 57th Street and 7th Avenue. I did this for about 3 years. Shout out to Kevin Jacoby, who got me that job, because, man, it was really hard to just make it work as a musician in New York City.
Yeah.
Just to say I'm playing music professionally and live out there and pay your rent is, you did it.
Well,
you figured something out, right?
Like, that's crazy.
So this job, in a strange way, held it down for quite some time. I got to cut my teeth in the heart of the city, and kind of see like what life was like for a big demographic of people, all the way from homeless all the way to like, you know, rich and famous that pop out there. So I learned a lot at that job, and it was tough. It was soul sucking for a while. Towards the end, I was like, I can't believe I moved out here to do this. Like, this is what I'm doing. Shortly, while I still had the gig, my brother, who moved out to New York with me, always been a hustler, always trying to work on the next step. He got a job working second camera, shooting mostly B-roll for the interviews at Hot New Hip Hop. So for like a lot of rappers, it was an impressive internship to get at the time. No money was seen, but just the fact that like we were trying to make stuff happen.
Yeah, you're getting indoors.
We had a couple groups that he also managed that, you know, I'd play in, that like we were trying to hustle. We were trying to make that happen, something in the industry. Make a long story short, I was always playing local gigs, right? The Knitting Factory happened because we started these two random bands. It was called All Natural, which is a hip-hop group, and this other group I actually didn't start, but my friends from college, Leasha Julius and Caleb Eberhardt, started this band called Quincy Vidal. And these were bands that we'd try to hop on the bills of local artists that had a little bit more buzz than us. And slowly we started a collective, my brother and I, and the two brother-sister bands. It was called Family Tree. And we just tried to play local gigs as much as we could. The first Knitting Factory show was for just like a random hip-hop night. So I can't remember. There was someone on the bill. He went by the name Simba at the time, and we opened for him. And locally, he had a buzz, and people were coming out. But that was the first time I saw an opportunity as far as like, oh, maybe we can play here again. Maybe the Knitting Factory can be like a thing where like local gigs that we play get kind of held at. It started slowly becoming a regular spot for us to play gigs. So much so that after a period of time, they'd have a comedy night right next door to the main room of the Knitting Factory, which is really cool because sometimes our gig would overlap into that comedy night.
Okay.
At the time, no one knew who he was going to be, but Hannibal Buress was doing his nights. He kind of hosted this night at the time. And he would heard the music a couple times, or just it would overlap into his thing, and it started becoming a thing where like, okay, this could be something. Like we could work out of these venues, and it could become a thing where people start hearing like the band at a venue, and maybe it becomes a part of their act. Down the road, that was happening with a couple different groups. I would go and jam at Arlene's Grocery. They had this huge jam session, and huge names. Common would come in and do like just start rapping because he heard the band sounded really good, just like a backing band, you know. So he'd come in. Everyone knows Common. He'd have his space on stage. Just putting in the time at that DIY level is what started any type of buzz for me.
Yeah.
I also had a brother that was very much into what I wanted to do.
In the mix,
and also wanted to do it himself. So he was constantly hustling, trying to make something happen. That Hot New Hip Hop job, internship Phil had, that's how I met Action Bronson. That got my foot in the door at Viceland. That kind of springboarded the entire second level music work for me.
That's what I wanted to get into because we're almost at about 30 minutes here.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, no. So that was kind of like, I imagine at the New York level, like getting into something like, you know, that Action Bronson Viceland thing. You're now living the dream.
It was like proof, you know, it was like finally like there was a legitimate outcome for all this time that I had spent wondering or like wishing.
Yeah.
It's a funny thing too. As much as I was supported as a child, there's always that like, oh shit, you're gonna move out to New York City to play jazz.
Especially like in Buffalo, like it's known, like New York is always known in a place like Buffalo where it's not as much of like a dream. Like if you're from Toronto, like New York's like in movies.
Yeah.
You know, Buffalo's just like, oh man, like it's a whole other.
Yes, exactly.
Like they know New York more than.
Yeah. you know, man, everything's a process too. You don't see the outcome for so much longer. So that's why being consistent, truthfully, loving what you're doing and being consistent with it is the goal. It's the answer, really. Phil, my brother, was shooting B-roll footage. Action Bronson came in to do an interview, and at the very end of the interview, he mentioned wanting a live band for his next project.
Oh, wow.
My brother stuck his neck out and said, hey, can we talk at the end for a second? Ended up getting the information of his managers and somewhat of a timeline of how he wanted to work things out. Within the next year and a half to 2 years, 3-4 different discussions and conversations were made with like how we were going to be in a relationship.
So it wasn't like an overnight thing.
No, it took persistence and like the want to like make that happen. And people don't understand, like, you could be really good at anything, but you also have to form relationships with people. You have to humbly and in tasteful ways form a relationship that keeps the person wanting to be next to you. I remember there's a couple instances we had a rehearsal. Action heard our band, our group, All Natural, and he had a show coming up at this venue called Terminal 5, and he wanted a backing band. So he hit up my brother, his management hit up my brother, hey, can we set up a rehearsal for the guys to learn the tunes, and I would love for them to be the band for this live gig. So we all freak out. We get super excited. We go in a week ahead of time. We learn all his tunes perfectly. Like the whole record that he was going to want to play live, we learned all these tunes. Classic cuts, Baby Blue, Terry, all the big Mr. Wonderful cuts at that time off that record. He comes in, he brings the whole entourage to the thing. We smoke 15 blunts. You can't even see in the room. We kill the rehearsal. We do an incredible job. We're super stoked to start this whole thing. We're going to do a couple more rehearsals, and the show's going to happen. Make a long story short, he ends up firing his manager that week. We lose the contact to the thing. There's no more gig. There's no more budget for the band. It never happens, right?
Oh
We're all super hurt. Oh, that was the only in we had. That was the only time we'll get to make that happen, whatever. We put that away for another year until it became a thing. Out of nowhere, Action tweets one day, this is a year later, I'm at the West 4th Handball Street handball courts, West 4th Street handball courts, handing out pizza. Come down and like say what up. So my brother, being as advantageous as he was, he doesn't even say a word to any of us. Gets on the train, goes on West 4th Street, and Bronson is sweating, covered in sweat. The story's incredible. And he gets done with the handball game, and he takes a knee like this, sitting down. And my brother gets the gumption, walks over, and sits right next to him, does the same pose. He goes, hey, what's up, man? I don't know if you remember me.
Wow.
And Action was like, oh my God, I do remember you, blah, blah. He goes, yeah, I hit up your manager a couple times. It never ended up working out. If you're ever looking for a live band or anything like that, please, I'd love for you to hit me out. Don't hesitate to reach out. They exchange information, blah, blah, blah. We get a random call probably 3 weeks to a month later. Hey, I'm looking for a musical director for this show. I'm going to send us a cab to your house on Monday morning. This is a Saturday night. On Monday morning to the studio. It's in Brooklyn. Everything's all set. I want you to come in and talk to me and the producers of the show, and we'll figure it out. I'm thinking this guy wants me to do the same thing he wanted a year and a half ago. He's got a show at Terminal 5. He wants me to get the live band set up for it. We'll have rehearsals, and it'll be great. So I'm like, I'm glad we didn't sour the waters there, and it ended up being a cool relationship.
Yeah.
I take the cab. I get in the cab, which was already a dream. I get in the cab at 7 a.m. Monday morning. It takes me to Viceland headquarters on South 2nd Street in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. I have my dinky little practice amp and my bass, and I'm super nervous. I get out of this cab, and out of the door walks out Action Bronson, Alchemist, Mayhem Loren, and Big Body Bess. Probably the most eccentric and intimidating group of individuals I had seen in the entertainment level at that time. They scoop me up like a cousin, like a little cousin, And they go, let's get you all set up. We got to get you the facial recognition scan. I could tell Bronson really liked saying that term. We got to get you set up with the facial recognition scan at the front, and you'll have your own little area here. And let me introduce you to the producers. There's a contract. You got to look over the contract. My mind is
you're like, what?
I'm like, what the hell is happening? So we get to the kitchen, the Munchies test kitchen, and a bunch of the producers are on the table, and they have the contract set up. And I get looked at, hey, Dom, so we hear that you're the musical director for Mr. Bronson. We're ready to embark on a 60-episode television show. We're going to air it on Viceland and Munchies as a part of the late-night food. I think it was just like, I don't remember what the exact pitch was. It was for they have a bunch of late-night food and talk shows on Viceland, and this was going to be one of them. He at that time had a show out already called Fuck That's Delicious. This was going to be like a spin-off where he just interviews famous celebrities, has a celebrity chef come in, we eat, smoke, drink, be merry, do a musical segment, and then that's the show. My mind was absolutely blown. I had no idea that this was going to be what this project was going to be.
Yeah.
I'm looking at a contract. It looks like I'm staring at Chinese on a paper. I had
Yeah,
no
you're
idea.
Like, what even is this? Yeah.
So as calm and as cool as I could, I look at they're all staring at me like, okay, you ready for this? I look up at everything on the table and I say, may I please use the bathroom? And they all kind of like sniff. Absolutely, Mr. Missana, no problem. So I like slowly try, like without them seeing, which is impossible, grab the contract off the table. I'm like sliding it towards my leg, and I slip out. I go to the bathroom with the contract, and I call my dad. It's the first person I can think of to call. And the first two words, I'm like half crying. The first two words on my mouth was, "Is it? I think it happened. I think it finally happened." Which I'm just laughing my ass off at this now, and he's like aggressively nonchalant. Oh, what happened? Would you get a job? Haha. Makes a joke. I'm like, yeah, I think I got the job. I got asked to musically direct this live band for this TV show. I don't know what it is. Like, we know nothing about contracts. Do we have a lawyer? I don't have a manager, anything. So quickly, he was excited. I made all the right phone calls after that day, but I had to grow up about 10 years in 3 hours and really try to get my shit together and figure out what I was going to do. They had me in charge of hiring a band for the show. I ended up bringing in one of my guys, Paul Wilson, is a keyboard player, and this other producer, who you guys may know, his name's Harry Fraud, La Musica de Harry Fraud, brought in a couple of his guys from surf school, and we all met. And, I ended up directing this band for a live television show, 60-episode live television show. Then they brought us on. We recorded some stuff for Fuck That's Delicious, a couple other episodes. We have some Spotify live cuts for Bronson. A couple really cool gigs. It popped my next level off there, I kind of got the inside look at what the business was like. I had a co-sign from one of the bigger dudes in the game at that time, and I was slowly getting cooler and cooler gigs. One of my best friends for a long time, his name's Gabriel Garzon Montano. I had toured with him previously to that a little bit. And then I was getting other jobs. I was playing bass for a band called Quantic. Shout out Will Holland, amazing producer, songwriter. All that stuff kind of, as soon as you start in our industry, get one cool thing, word of mouth, and then posting. It pops you off, and then you develop relationships. You try to tastefully be yourself in those situations and do your best. Show up prepared and willing and pumped, and it usually ends up working in your favor.
Yeah, I think that's really like what it takes is just that one thing, and proving that you're ready for that one thing. And then once, because in my mind, them all coming out was like a pure intimidation thing, like they were like, because that could have been, you could have got killed on that contract, like
without a doubt,
they could have ruined you, and they but you pulled through, you delivered your job, and that's when everything starts happening. People know that you're like legit, you're serious, you're there to, make shit happen.